The United States Embassy in Baghdad issued an emergency warning this weekend, telling all American citizens in Iraq to leave the country immediately. The warning cited attacks on Americans and U.S.-associated targets by Iranian-backed militia groups that are now operating with increasing aggression in the 16th day of Operation Epic Fury. 5 Iraqi people were wounded after multiple rockets struck in and around Baghdad International Airport, including a facility used by the U.S. Embassy, according to CNN reporting from Sunday. Iraqi airspace remains closed. The U.S. Embassy has itself been struck multiple times during this conflict, with a helipad hit by missile fire in a development that provoked a formal U.S. condemnation of Iran. And there are tens of thousands of Americans in Iraq right now, including contractors working on oil infrastructure projects, employees of American companies with Iraqi operations, journalists, diplomats, academics, and humanitarian workers. The embassy's urgent message to those Americans, leave now, is one of the most direct and consequential government warnings issued to American civilians in years, and it is receiving a fraction of the media coverage that the military strike updates are generating. I went through CNN's live coverage from Sunday, March 15th, CBS News live updates, Al Jazeera's Day 16 reporting, the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the State Department's travel advisory documentation, historical precedent for embassy closures and civilian evacuations in conflict zones, and the specific security situation in Iraq as of today, to give you the complete picture of what this evacuation warning means, who it affects, and what the risks are for Americans who are still in the country. By the end of this video, you will understand the specific threats that prompted this warning, the practical realities of leaving a country with closed airspace and active missile attacks, and what this development tells us about the expanding geographic scope of the Iran war's direct impact on American citizens. Let's start with who is actually in Iraq right now. The assumption that most Americans are making when they hear Iraq mentioned in the context of this war is that the people there are soldiers and Marines who knew the risks when they signed up. That assumption is both partially true and significantly incomplete. Yes, the United States maintains military forces at multiple installations in Iraq, including bases that have been repeatedly targeted by Iranian-backed militia groups throughout this conflict. The Popular Mobilization Forces, the Iraqi militia umbrella organization with deep ties to Iran, has been conducting attacks on American positions in Iraq for years and has intensified those attacks since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. But beyond the military personnel, Iraq has a significant American civilian presence that is more vulnerable and less prepared for the current threat environment. American oil company contractors work on projects throughout Iraq's oil-producing southern regions. American NGO and humanitarian workers operate in multiple Iraqi cities. American journalists are covering this conflict from Baghdad and other locations. American academics with long-standing research partnerships in Iraq were present when the war began. American business people with commercial interests in the country's growing private sector. These are ordinary civilians, not soldiers, who are now in a country where rocket attacks on American-associated facilities happen daily and where the embassy itself has been targeted multiple times. The practical challenge of leaving Iraq right now is significantly more difficult than an embassy warning might suggest to someone sitting safely in the United States. Iraqi airspace has been closed since the early days of the conflict, meaning commercial airline evacuation is not available. The land borders with neighboring countries involve traveling through areas that are themselves under security pressure, with Iranian-backed forces active in western Iraq near the Syrian border and the Iranian border in the east. The State Department has been working to arrange evacuation routes, with the CNN reporting noting that millions of dollars have been earmarked for evacuating tens of thousands of Americans who were stranded in the Middle East when the war began. But the logistics of evacuating American civilians from a landlocked country with closed airspace and active militia attacks on American-associated targets is genuinely complex, and the timeline for those evacuations is not fully clear from public reporting. The attacks on American-associated targets in Iraq that prompted the embassy warning have been escalating in a pattern that tracks closely with the broader war's intensity. Iranian-backed militia groups in Iraq, including Kataib Hezbollah and Asaib al-Haq, have a history of attacking American forces in Iraq going back years, and the current war has given those groups both additional motivation and additional Iranian authorization to escalate their activities. The rocket attack on Baghdad International Airport that wounded 5 Iraqis is particularly significant because airports are typically treated as critical civilian infrastructure that even combatants have incentives to preserve. The fact that rockets are landing in and around the airport signals that the militia groups operating in Iraq have either reduced their concern about civilian infrastructure damage or have been given authorization to expand their target set beyond purely military installations. The legal and diplomatic significance of the Baghdad embassy attacks deserves particular emphasis because it involves one of the most fundamental principles of international law. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which Iran has signed, establishes that the premises of diplomatic missions are inviolable and that host countries must protect those premises from intrusion or damage. When rockets strike facilities used by the American embassy, the receiving state, which is Iraq, has obligations under international law to protect those facilities. Iraq is in an extraordinarily difficult position as a result, because it hosts both American military and diplomatic personnel and Iranian-backed militia groups whose activities the Iraqi government has limited ability to control. The Iraqi government has protested the use of its territory as a battleground by both sides, while being unable to effectively prevent either American operations against Iran from Iraqi territory or Iranian-backed militia attacks on American positions within Iraq. The historical precedent for embassy closures and American civilian evacuations in Middle East conflict zones provides context for understanding the severity of the current warning. The 1979 Iran hostage crisis, in which the American embassy in Tehran was seized and 52 Americans were held for 444 days, fundamentally changed how the U.S. government thinks about embassy security in the Middle East. The 1983 Beirut embassy bombing, the 1998 East Africa embassy bombings, and the 2012 Benghazi attack each represented escalation points that prompted significant changes in American diplomatic security posture and in some cases had major political consequences. The current Baghdad warning, coming in the context of an active war with Iran, during which the embassy has already been struck multiple times, represents the most acute security threat to a major American diplomatic mission since those historical benchmarks. For Americans who have family members, friends, or colleagues currently in Iraq, the embassy warning is a direct and urgent call to action. The State Department Emergency Line and the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program are the official channels for Americans in Iraq to register their presence and get evacuation assistance. For Americans watching this from home, the evacuation warning is a reminder that the Iran war's direct impact on American citizens extends far beyond gas prices and mortgage rates to the physical safety of tens of thousands of Americans who are currently in a country being rocked by Iranian-backed militia attacks on American-associated targets daily. Let's bring this all together. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad issued an emergency warning this weekend telling all American citizens in Iraq to leave immediately due to Iranian-backed militia attacks on American-associated targets. Iraqi airspace is closed. Rockets struck in and around Baghdad International Airport, including a facility used by the embassy, wounding 5 people. The embassy itself has been targeted multiple times during the conflict. Tens of thousands of Americans, including civilians, contractors, journalists, and NGO workers, are currently in Iraq and face the practical challenge of evacuating from a country with closed airspace and active militia threats. The Iraqi government is in a difficult position, unable to control militia groups while also hosting American forces that Iranian-backed groups are targeting. The State Department has earmarked funds for civilian evacuations, but the logistics of removing American civilians from this environment are complex. This story connects the abstract geopolitics of the Iran war to the immediate physical safety of real American people in a country where rockets are landing on American-associated facilities every day. If this breakdown helped you understand a story that directly affects American civilians whose safety is not receiving the coverage it deserves, please hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the follow-up. Drop a comment if you have family or connections in Iraq right now. I will see you in the next one.